Hi, native whole beings. I'm so excited about today's interview. I have a very special guest for you today, Lisa Hum from Australia. Let me introduce her. She's a yoga teacher, a registered yoga therapist, a breathwork practitioner, conscious life coach, and an author. And she has many years experience working with depression, anxiety, emotional and relationship issues, as well as trauma. Her real passion lies in emotional freedom and empowering people to live the life, to experience the life they always wanted to experience. I can't express enough how excited I am. I believe this will be jam-packed with values, so keep with us. And I have some exciting questions for Lisa, and I'm just looking forward to get to know you more. How are you doing, Lisa?
I'm great. Thank you, Victor. I'm also very excited to be here, and thanks for the great introduction.
Awesome. So, first of all, I would like to know more about you and more importantly about your journey. I know that you had a journey of being in self-development, what some people call like a self-development junkie who's learning, listening, everything. And somehow you found self-love, self-acceptance. Is that true? How, how was your journey?
Well, look, that was probably quite an accurate description about me being a course junkie. I had certainly, let's say, maybe 10 years ago from now, I was already teaching yoga. I had read every self-development book under the sun, and done dozens of courses, and I think on sort of theory level, I got a lot of that stuff, but on a personal, emotional level, something still wasn't working for me. Mm-hmm. And I was in, a lot of my relationships were very painful and unfulfilling. I had some persistent health issues, and basically I just knew that something was still missing. And then sort of by chance, I discovered the breath work, which is basically emotional release work. And I realized that what was missing in the whole sort of spiritual and self-development industry of today was the emotional component, because we live with our emotions all day, every day, even when we're not aware of them. And particularly then, they really drive us. They drive every single decision, reaction in us. And through the emotional work and really deep self-discovery, I actually had this idea that I knew myself quite well, but all I really knew was my defense. So I didn't really know myself fully. And how could you love yourself fully if you don't know yourself fully? So certainly there was a big gap in the self-love department. I was very much perfectionist, and I had very sort of narrow ideas of the kind of person that I wanted to be and the kind of life that I needed to live. And I also had this sort of narrow idea for the rest of the world. I thought that I knew how the world should be, or how other people should be, which is a recipe for disaster, because the world and other people will never be like that, not even ourselves. So through some really deep self-discovery, and I can say for myself and for all of the people that I did that with, and that I've facilitated since then, it's not a pretty process, because we're discovering all of that stuff which we've hidden into the dark cupboards, and didn't want to look at, all those things that we're either ashamed of, or that we don't accept, or that we don't even want to own that are part of us. So it was really through getting to know myself fully, and hence having the opportunity to then begin to love and accept myself fully, that my world changed. Not necessarily externally. Externally, my world was pretty good, but internally, I was a mess. And internally, my world changed completely. Just those things that would trigger me before just didn't trigger me anymore. And I, certain things, certain patterns that I was manifesting in my life repeatedly, be they with relationships or other things, they just stopped manifesting. So yes, a lot of that defense part, which is where we most of the time come from when we're relating to each other, it just started to crumble and fall away. And then underneath you discover your true essence, your real self, and in all of its humanity, in all of its so-called flaws, and all of that as well.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I was nodding and smiling because what you were describing is really familiar. What you were describing to me, it was really familiar to me. And I think that you were describing, like, there is something, I feel that there is something deeply almost like spoiled in the self-development industry, or like wrong in terms of we try to fix ourselves, and we're looking for external things to make ourselves complete, and this fits quite well to the mind. And what you were telling is that there is a completely different place where you really found not first yourself, and through finding yourself and going through these internal processes, you actually, your life started to improve just because you become a different person.
That's right. We attract different things into our life, different people, different opportunities.
So I'm curious, like, could you talk about more the breath work, how you found it? What is the meaning in this internal journey? What is the meaning of using breath work?
So the breath is one of the body's own natural release mechanisms for releasing excess stress, emotional content, trauma, things like that. It's something that the body naturally does, amongst a couple of other things like shaking, after we go through a traumatic experience. It's the same for animals, it's the same for children. However, as we grow up and we start to be conditioned by a lot of the our social conditioning of it's not acceptable to be like this, or don't be like that, or don't show your feelings, we learn to suppress this mechanism. So when you see a kid going through a tantrum, they'll be breathing in this really intense, full-on way, often through the mouth. And if you have children or around children, you'll notice that children will shift very quickly from one emotion to another. They just sort of flow through them, like, they'll have a crazy tantrum and then the next moment it's gone. It doesn't hang out. It's because they have actually released it physically from the body. Now, as we grow up and we start to suppress these mechanisms, so that in order not to show other people how we're feeling, and also perhaps because we don't even want to go there ourselves, perhaps we actually begin to lock these emotions into the body. So as we restrict our breathing and we tense our muscles and we literally swallow down our emotions, we are locking them into the physical body and into the cell memory. And even though these emotions, sometimes after bottling up for a period of time, they can become unconscious, they're still in our energy system. Yeah. And they drive us in ways which we are not consciously aware of. And either they come out in those destructive, toxic ways, blowing up at unexpected times, at people who have little or nothing to do with the origin of these emotions, or they turn inwards. The energy, emotional energy, as all energy, it needs to go somewhere. So if it doesn't get out, even if it doesn't seep out sideways in those kind of sneaky, snarky ways, which we think we're covering it up, but everyone can sense it. The other alternative is for this energy to turn inwards. So that's when it shows up as anxiety or depression or chronic pain, chronic fatigue, self-sabotage, a number of things, and physical illness. So the breath work is literally just mimicking the body's natural way of releasing stress and trauma and emotional intensity, emotional charge. And through the breath work, we are releasing all this accumulated emotional content. And as a result, the pressure that's been building up in our system, it gets released. And then also, as we get more used to experiencing and feeling our emotions, we no longer bottle them up because we are just allowing them to flow in a healthy way. And I think here is perhaps worth mentioning that that despite the way that we might have learned, all emotions have got their healthy and useful expressions. Mm-hmm. Even those ones that get a really bad rap in the especially in the spiritual industry, like anger or fear, they all have their healthy expressions. It's just when we suppress them, they become toxic after a while.
Yeah, it seems like that. As we're born, we basically we expressed ourselves fully and lovingly, and then we learned and believed that there are certain parts of us which is not okay, not good to have, and it creates a shadow side, right?
Exactly.
And then we start to suppress these, and we believe that anger is bad, or I don't know, for men or some women even, crying is bad, feeling sadness. And although they are nothing else, just anger is like action. That is something what we maybe feel helpless about, and we need that extra energy or something. So I'd like to ask about, there is a question what I'm playing with a lot recently, is as a coach, when I'm working with people, we go to that emotional part, because as you just said, it is where we store traumas, where we store basically codes about reality, or about how we perceive reality. And I'm curious because I started to work not just with emotions, but stories. So I'm curious, like, what do you think? What kind of roles have? How do they relate? And how does it relate to our internal processes and our internal journey, the emotion and the story? Which one we should work with?
That's a really good question, actually, Victor. And the story part is extremely interesting, and well, it is interesting, but at the same time, it's completely irrelevant and not interesting at all because it's just what we create. So, from my point of view, the emotion is the really important part. Because the emotion is the pure energy. It is the one that we need to allow ourselves to feel and experience in order to release it. If we stop ourselves from feeling and experiencing an emotion that arises, that is what's called suppression, and what we were just talking about before. Now, the stories are what we often create around the emotions. So let's say, I'll use a really simple example. Let's say I'm sitting in a restaurant and I'm waiting for my friend or my husband to arrive, and they're late. And so I start to feel angry or irritated or hurt. So the reality of that situation, the facts are that I am here, they're late, and I'm feeling this. That is the reality. However, we often start to make stories around these things, which means, for example, I might be making up a story in my head that them being late means that they don't care, or that their work is more important than me. And so by creating these stories, I'm creating a whole different reality for myself. And I mean, that's always the case. My reality is always going to be different to your reality. And the sooner we understand that, that makes relationships a whole lot easier. However, the story part is often what we get caught up in. We get caught up in the mental part of it, which is the story part, which is, the who said and did what, but also who should have said this and who didn't do that, and what we make it mean in our heads. So the quicker we learn to let go of the story, just recognize the story as something our mind is creating, and stick to the facts, which are what has just happened, without any exaggeration, without any interpretation, and how we're feeling. That is the quickest way to release a trigger. So let's say I'm triggered in a situation. As long as we stayed caught up in the mental story, the trigger will not be released. In fact, we can grow it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But as soon as we are able to just let go of that story and realize that actually we don't know what's happened, what the reality is for the other person, when we realize how big a part of it is actually our interpretation, and let go of that and to simply own our feelings. I'm feeling hurt, or I'm feeling unimportant, or I'm feeling unloved, and just sit with that. And that might sound like, well, but that's worse. It feels a lot better to make the other person wrong. And yes, it does, but then we get stuck. So, that's a really big part of my work also, is separating the story and the emotion, and just sitting with the emotion.
Just sitting with the emotion. I think that's really important, because up until an emotion or a mental state or a story have power over us up until we merge with it. We accept it and started to love it. So it is somehow like we accept and love these states or present, and we merge with them instead of trying to run away, because their power is, while we run away, they can go after us, in a sense, if it makes sense to you. But if we say we sit with you, I sit with the anger or the frustration, it doesn't have that power over me.
Exactly. There's a very, very astute saying that goes, what we resist persists. So as soon as we are really allow ourselves to just feel the emotion and own it, and own the fact that the emotion is ours, and it's not to do with you, and it's not to do with what's happening outside of me. that very quickly the emotion will feel it, but it will also dissolve and transform.
Do you think, because I work a lot with self-inquiry and sitting in that space when you realize that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your body, you are something else, right? And I feel that that's a big part of being resilient, to have kind of how can I say, so grounded. And I'm just curious, you sit with the emotion, but what do you think about unidentifying with it? I still feel it, I acknowledge it, I don't ignore it at all, but saying that I experience it, I watch it, it comes, stays, and goes, and just be with that, like that. What do you think about this? I may challenge it, and I'm curious.
Well, I think
or we should own it, like that's what I feel. And would you express to your husband, like, hey, I just have to express this, when you came late, I felt frustrated?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all for expressing our emotions. It's a big part of owning them. So yes, I do agree to a point that I am not my emotions, I am not my defense, I am not even my thoughts. However, sometimes I think that can be used as a way of disowning our emotions. That can be used as an excuse not to express them, not to communicate them. That can be used as a defense, basically, of disassociating with everything. And I think that can be a little bit dangerous. However, the statement is correct. I am not my emotions. There are energies rising in my body. But in that, having said that, I think that the owning part is extremely important. So as not to use that as a cop-out, not to use that as a defense and another form of suppression, because I think that is also quite common.
Yes. I think.
And you were asking before, do I advocate expressing our emotions? Absolutely. And I'm not saying that it needs to be, if I'm being triggered, I think the important steps are for me to firstly figure out what is the emotion that has risen in me, because that can be tricky. As we know, emotions often exist in layers.
Yeah.
And as long as we're just dealing with the top layer, we're actually not getting anywhere. It is the deepest, the core emotion that needs to be released. Now, so it's important that I work out what is it that I'm really feeling. Perhaps on the surface, I might feel angry because my friend or my husband is late. But if I go deep enough, I'll discover that actually the anger was just covering up some hurt, that I'm feeling unimportant, I'm feeling unloved. So that would be the sort of the step number one. And then for if this is particularly if we're talking about a person that's in your life, I think it can be dangerous if we have emotions and we have triggers that we haven't communicated. It means we're sitting on a lot of stuff. So next time I see you, I'm going to be sitting on this emotion that I didn't express to you. So important part of that releasing process is for me to communicate it to you. And it needs to be done in that way where I'm actually owning that this emotion is mine. It's not about you. And that I realized that, when you were late, I felt unimportant and I felt unloved. And saying that out loud and owning my emotion is going to really make a big shift.
Yeah.
So if I leave that unexpressed and you're still a person that's in my life, it's going to affect our relationship. So all of those unexpressed emotions, they hang around and they affect our life and our relationships in a big way. So in that sense, I think it's very important to communicate them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, if someone annoys you on the street, you have to stop them and tell them. But in those important relationships in our life or at work, where we are around the same people every day, it's an important.
Basically, asking the question, what will make our this life, a much better experience? If I express this, like by owning and being vulnerable, or maybe not expressing it to someone walking on the street. I think you made there a really important point that that it is important before someone would go into separating from emotions to actually merge with it and express it and accept it, because if not, it may become another defense mechanism, and it can be really tricky. So I think that's a really, really good point there. And the other thing is what I loved there, I think it's underrated today, the strength of owning our feelings and being okay with owning what we feel, being okay with feeling stuff, and being okay with being vulnerable, because I think people make it like they take it as equal, like being vulnerable and being weak. But actually, in my point of view, is like being vulnerable. So people don't look down on being vulnerable, but they look down if you don't accept it. You don't accept what you feel, so if you're vulnerable and you accept what's inside, people will love you for it.
And particularly when we're talking about relationships, be they intimate relationships or friendships or relationships at work, it is only through that vulnerability that we can actually have any kind of intimate connection. Because otherwise we are just relating to each other from that defense, which is not really the real us. So we may be in a relationship and it may look intimate on the outside, but we'll still feel like we're isolated. We'll still feel like there's a space between us, like there's a separation, until we have the courage to be vulnerable and share those feelings that, all our feelings really, whether they are painful ones or happy light ones or whatever. But it's definitely, I most definitely agree with you in the fact that it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. That's definitely not the same as weakness, although often it can be seen as way, or it's the reasoning that we give ourselves not to be vulnerable.
Yeah. I was watching this video. That's how I found you. You were in a conference. It was back then, 2013, and you were addressing a guy. But you were telling to this guy, like, look at him, this beautiful being, and that was the point. What kind of touched me, just because I kind of felt that kind of acceptance, that kind of seeing the perfect in an imperfect human way in everyone, if it makes sense to you. So seeing the innate nature of everyone, and you addressed that guy. So I'm curious, you seem to be someone who's seeing others as like a innate, the whole being, I can say.
Well, that's certainly something that has changed for me. And that was one of those things that changed my life was first, and it needs to begin with ourselves. I don't think I would be able to see another person immediately as extreme intelligence and beauty of life if I still had all those really harsh judgments that I used to have of myself. So I used to see every person as almost a threat, someone that I needed to figure out so that I can best protect myself or keep the upper hand or something like this, like a competition. And that was a big part of my process, was realizing that this defense mechanism that I had, that came from fear, and the fear of intimacy and fear of connection, and fear of the judgments that were really just my own judgments about myself. So after working through these things, and of course it's a process that's not a process that's stopped. It's a process that's still ongoing. But more and more, when I meet a person now, I'm amazed how amazing people are. It's just a viewpoint that's changed. I do see all of that beauty and the perfection in the imperfection. The body that breathes and then pumps blood, and the self-healing system that we are, and the heart and the intelligence that's there, not necessarily the mental intelligence, not the kind that you learn in the university, but the one that we are born with, that's stuff that we cannot unlearn, that we just have as an inherent gift as we come into the world. So yes, absolutely, that's been a big change in my life. And it's beautiful because it also it makes it easier for me now to connect with people. I found it extremely hard to connect with people, and I could maybe do so on a surface level, but yeah, there's definitely been a big shift, and it's literally just been through the self-love, because I think that's like even the Bible recognizes that we can only love other people to the extent that we love ourselves. And it's a very true thing. I think it's quite impossible to love other people more than we love ourselves.
Yeah.
So it all comes back to the self-love again.
Nice. Yeah, that's really important. We have to love ourselves first before we really learn to love others. That's true. So, coming back to trauma, a lot of people say that, hey, I don't have any big trauma. What's then?
Well, trauma is certainly a very loaded word. It makes us think of something really, really big and intense, like physical abuse or war or great accidents or things like that are gross and quite obvious. However, we all have trauma. trauma can be very small, and trauma can be very difficult to pinpoint, and it can be emotional. And actually, it is that more subtle trauma that can be more tricky to work with because it's not obvious. So, for example, for me to really own some of my feelings from childhood was a difficult one, because I had this, what we call the Disneyland childhood, that in my memory I had made it all beautiful and fantastic, but there were some deep feelings that I hadn't owned about how I'd felt, and that were then affecting my life, 20, 30 years on. That's the more kind of subtle trauma of the emotional kind, usually. That, but yeah, as you mentioned, we all carry some trauma, and it doesn't have to be something that's so obvious. It's almost the bigger trauma can be easier to work with because we know what it is, and it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's seemingly even these smaller traumas look like, or like have the same effect over a lifetime. So someone has like a really obvious trauma. Someone has like just, I don't know, the parents shouted at him or her at the wrong time or wrong way, or I perceived it in that way. And both person can become the same shy person.
Or a baby cries and mother takes a minute or two to get to the crying baby, which feels like an eternity for a baby that's just arrived in the world. Little things like that, or how we come into the world. There are whole generations of babies that were separated from their mothers in the hospital and kept in a separate room for days, and just brought into, simple things like that, that can be root cause of anxiety, for example. That's actually quite an interesting one, because as we are born in the birth process, the baby needs to be full of adrenaline in order to get through that whole birthing process and come through the birth canal. And then if we come into bright lights and, we're handled by doctors and taken away from our mother, that adrenaline and amount of stress hormones that's flooded in our system doesn't come down. However, if we are then immediately put into our mother's chest and we have the warmth and the breathing and the closeness of the mother that we've been surrounded by, we've literally been inside for 9 months, the stress levels and the stress hormones come down to normal natural levels. So even traumas like that we can't remember can still hang around in our system and in our body and our unconscious for literally decades later, and affect our health and our relationships.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is one kind of breathing, like this rebirthing process, or that's a therapy, right? Did you work with that? That's supposed to tackle this kind of traumas? Is it true?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things going under the name of rebirthing. So I avoid using that word just not to create a misunderstanding. But yes, there is in the that I do, a lot of birth trauma and birth memories come up, but it's not necessarily just for that. All sorts of trauma and unconscious early memories can come up. So, but yeah, absolutely, healing our birth trauma is quite big and quite important, particularly for these generations that were born in hospitals and separated from their mothers, and just that whole unnatural thing. So I think that's why the rebirthing has become such an important important modality in therapy for our generations, because we just had a lot of that kind of trauma. Whereas before, children were born at home mostly, and they were, straight away the mothers would help them and nurse them, and they would co-sleep, they would sleep together in the same bed, and the babies were not separated from their mothers, often especially in tribal cultures, the mothers carry their babies all the time. They're wrapped in their body. So there's a whole big difference that's happened, I think, over the last perhaps 100 years in the Western world.
Yeah, it's too important, and it's an interesting point. I like to ask, like, what do you think? Where do people hold their traumas most usually?
Look, they really can be anywhere in the body. However, a very common area is around the heart, because our heart is our feeling center. It's sort of perhaps the most vulnerable part of us. So we do create a lot of armoring around the heart, and we protect our heart, and we, perhaps slowly close it up. So the heart is one of those areas, but really it can be almost anywhere in the body, depending on, what the trauma is from. It actually can be physical trauma, but it can be a lot of different kinds. But heart, and probably also the pelvis, because that's the center of our sexual energy, and particularly for women, that can be extremely vulnerable area.
How would you define happiness?
Another good question, Victor. I think happiness is going to mean very different things to different people, or it's going to look very different to different people. But probably the things that always are going to be common are just feeling good in yourself. Because when we feel good, when we love ourselves, it makes it easier for us to go through everything else in life. So I don't think happiness is the lack of challenges or lack of even conflict or anything like that. We can be completely happy and still, we still live the human existence, which we're cohabiting the world with people who have different ideas and different realities. And so happiness is definitely an internal state. And I think also that true happiness, will be related to what I call emotional freedom, which doesn't mean freedom from our emotions, being emotion free, but feeling free to have our emotions. So sometimes, often in my work, I see, someone having a really good cry, a big emotional release perhaps for the first time in their life in 10 years or, 20 years. And it really feels so good, It feels good to have a good cry. It feels good to allow yourself to have your emotions. They're just different colors and vibrations in our existence. So all of that, I think, is a pretty important part of happiness, that we are okay and happy with all of those different flavors of life and the world. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So as I understand you, it's not about sorting yourself out. Like, I'm sorted now. So that's a kind of promise what a lot of self-development path promises. I mean, subconsciously or sometimes even consciously. And what I hear from you is like emotional freedom is to live free by owning your emotions and being free to express them freely. So is the freedom to express, to own and express your emotions? Is that true?
Yes, and it also includes as soon as as soon as I allow myself to have my emotions, I will then also almost by default allow you to have yours. And so if you're feeling angry, I won't take it personally. I'll let you have your anger and be with it, but I also won't try to fix it or make you wrong for it. And I think what you said before about trying to fix ourselves, and I think that's absolutely where often we go wrong. And actually, my upcoming book, Emotional Freedom for Everyone, starts with a statement that this book is not written for you to fix or better yourself. In fact, I live in a personal reality, a personal paradigm where there isn't anything wrong with you. There never was, and there never will be, and so it is.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what it's all about. The sooner we stop trying to fix ourselves, or let alone fix other people, that's a whole other. I won't even go there. But as soon as we try to fix ourselves or be a better person, or that's kind of like then we're missing the point.
Yeah.
And we can do that forever, and we'll never get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. It's interesting because when I was into the self-development journey, like I was just all about achieving and hustling and all of these. All of my life just went down, and especially my relationship, we always divorced with my wife, and interestingly, once I found the self-love, the kind of freedom you are talking about, it's interestingly things like my relationship with Anita, with my wife, just started to improve once I was good with myself, and it just started to somehow shape a form what I always wanted to have in my life, but not by I wanting to do with it anything. So it's just so interesting how emotional freedom, self-acceptance actually will improve your life without you wanting to improve it. So it's a counterintuitive thing. Um, Before that, I wanted to change everything in my life, and once I accepted things in my life, they started to improve. So it's interesting.
It all really comes back to the self-love, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's why I'm pretty big on that self-love. And it may look strange or sound strange that guy is talking about self-love so much, but hey, that's what it comes back to, isn't it?
It does. And through I see it again and again and again. That's what we experience in the world around us is just a reflection of how we feel on the inside. So, and this is something that I consciously knew before, but I never really grasped it. So even the criticism that I was afraid of, or that I was perceiving from the outside, it was all just coming from me. Or, the lack of love that I experienced in my relationships, again, that was my own lack of self-love. And saying that, I don't mean that in a way of blaming, but the point that I'm making is more about personal responsibility. And it is important to make that distinction between personal responsibility and blame, because it's not the same thing. So as soon as I take personal responsibility for everything that happens to me, or or let's put it in this way, the more willing I am to take responsibility for my life and all of my experience, the more freedom I will experience.
Yeah.
So as long as we blame our external circumstance, we remain a victim to it, and by default we're not free. But when the whole process of self-love, I think it's very much connected to that responsibility, because it's taking the responsibility that actually gives us power, that we actually are creating our whole reality. It's not just something that's just randomly happening to us. We create our whole entire reality, inside and out. So that's a big one. And I think the more that it's not something that needs to be like an on-off switch. It's either all or nothing, because I think it's very hard to just go ahead and take responsibility for everything all of a sudden. But the more we practice it and the more we extend that, the more we realize that it gives us the freedom and the power. Yeah.
Awesome. I really see now how these things come together, like emotional freedom. You take responsibility, you express your emotions, you merge with them, you become okay with feeling and wanting, and then through that you can accept yourself, or practice self-acceptance. That's kind of new self-improvement way, we can say.
Oh.
So,
And
yeah.
sorry to
No.
interrupt. It came to my mind. Within that process, there are going to be times where we don't love or accept ourselves, and that's also important to own and go ahead and own it, that shit, I don't accept this and I don't love this, or whatever it is. There's a part of me that coming to terms with even things like our self-hate. And I know that sounds like a really full-on word, and it is, because I've gone through that process, but it's important to also own those on the way to that self-love, because we can't just jump straight there. Sometimes we have to own all that painful stuff as well. And you kind of see that in so many people's journeys, or so many let's say spiritual teachers, or people who write amazing books about things like self-love. Most of them have gone through some kind of a process of either through depression, or like a deep process of going through our darker corners and our piles of kind of garbage and baggage, which isn't necessarily so fun, but it's often what it takes after decades of disowning and suppressing, is to own all of that more painful stuff as well. But it's definitely a process that's worth it in the end.
Great, awesome. I'd like to ask, what is the one question what you always wished for if someone would ask from you?
Do you mean in a professional setting or any kind of setting?
I would say anything that comes into your mind, what you feel important to share.
The one question I think that would have made a big difference in my life before I went through my process and ended up sort of where I am now. The one big question that I wished, I think, or that I didn't even know that I wished, but I did wish that now that would have been asked more times, was how you're really feeling. That's not something that, and that's something that I want to keep asking my children, because I want to know how they're really feeling. I don't want to just know that they're doing well at school, or that they're wearing the right clothes, or that they're behaving well, or their external appearance is good.
Yeah.
But I want to know how they're feeling. And I wish that in my childhood and my youth, that I would have been asked, how are you really feeling? Because that's the question that straight away, I think it comes from the heart, and it touches the heart, and it creates that opening and that connection. That's not just the external, the external defense. It's a very heart-based question. And that's the question that I keep asking again and again of my clients. How are you feeling? How is that making you feel?
I think we all can take that home. That question. Stay with us. Okay. And I think I just have another question, and maybe you just answered it, but then hopefully I will elicit something more. If there would be, or maybe the same, if there would be one thing, one legacy you could leave behind before you leave this earth, what would that be?
I think that would have to be the permission to feel. Just the simple permission to feel. And not just the permission to feel the love and the joy and the peace and all the stuff that we're sold. Because unfortunately, we cannot just feel those and then block off the painful stuff. If we block our joy, we block our bliss, we block all of that as well. So just the permission to feel and have our feelings, I think that would really make a big change in the world.
Yeah. Great. I think that's really important. Really, that's a big message. That's a big message. Okay, so you're writing the book Emotional Freedom, right? Right.
Yes. So we're just about to start.
Any info on that? When will it come out, or something?
I'm actually not 100% sure when it will come out yet. It all depends on how long the editing will take. But the material is ready, and the editing is just about to start. So I'm quite excited about that.
Great. And what else are you up to recently?
Pardon?
What else are you up to recently? Like, is there anything else you want to share? Like, any event or happening, or?
Well, I'm doing some courses also with the name Emotional Freedom for Everyone, and that's kind of seems to be my main life work at the moment, and it's just something that I'm growing, that I'm spreading, and finding extremely fulfilling to just be on that path of my life purpose. But that's really the next big thing is going to be the book.
I just wish you to be able to spread this message and leave that legacy to everyone, really. And let us know when your book is out. I'm glad to share it with the viewers, have some kind of link or something to that. And where can people find you?
So you can find me on my website, freedomtechniques.com.au. And there's a lot of information there about breath work and emotional work and a couple of other modalities around the same sort of work. And so I'll definitely once my book is out, innately Uful will be knowing for sure straight away, and it'll also be on my website. But you can connect with me through my website as well.
Splendid, awesome. I'm so excited. Is there anything else you want to share?
Look, there's so many things I want to share, but,
yeah, I'm aware
but I think we've had a really great conversation.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you for being here and sharing this awesome, really your being and your message. And I think that we tackled some really important stuff with emotional freedom, trauma, internal processes, who we are, how can we break free from the self-development and start to live a real life experience, where how can we own our feelings and being okay with who we are, being okay with being vulnerable and improve our relationships. We've been just covering so much good stuff. I cannot express my gratitude. I'm so grateful you were here, and thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Victor. It's been really my honor to be here, and I've so enjoyed getting to know you. It's been fantastic, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch and continue again.